Hello lovely people, welcome to another book chat, the regular roundup of stuff I've read at some point in my past. I've got a bunch, I'm just going to crack on, you know the drill by now.
Doobie 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 doo. Doobie 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 Sophie Vlogs.
The book I want to start off with is a crime classic, and that is 450 from Paddington by Agatha Christie. I, first of all, just adore these editions. I'm collecting these editions. I think they are lovely. They have these beautiful end papers. They are really, really nice. The premise of this book is that this woman, when she is on a train, at one point her train passes another train and she happens to look out the window and she sees a murder taking place on the next train. This woman happens to be friends with Miss Marple. She goes and she tells her about it, and Miss Marple starts looking into it. As with all Agatha Christie's, I really enjoyed reading this. This one in particular, I think potentially the ending was not the strongest ending. I did call it, but there are elements of it that sort of kind of come out of nowhere a little bit, and I prefer mystery endings where at least you have a lot more of the pieces so that you could... I went off of vibes rather than any solid knowledge. But Lucy, who is a character that Miss Marple sort of places in this house that to sort of gather some information on her behalf, that kind of thing. Lucy was an absolute delight. She was extremely competent, and I liked that. I didn't really like the element where it was like, I felt like though she had lots of the men were interested in her, and I feel like there's an element where it's like, which man will she choose? And I'm like, she's far too competent for this to be what we're thinking about her. But Miss Marple is always enjoyable, and I had a fun time. After that, I potentially have an unpopular opinion. So I read Another Time, Another Place by Jodi Taylor, which is, I don't know, is it the 12th book in the Chronicles of St. Mary's by now? This one was not my favourite. I'm going to go into this without doing spoilers because we are on the 12th book of the series, but essentially this series follows these time-travelling historians. They work from this institute called St. Mary's. There's this push and pull that's been going on with the organisation for a while, that is, how much is the government involved? Technically St. Mary's works with this university that funds them, and then occasionally they do things where they, you know, the university wants to know more about this particular time of history, so they go there, they put together these like immersive educational things, that kind of thing. But the government are becoming steadily like more involved, and that's very much an aspect in this. The main thing is that this book feels like a bridge. I really enjoyed the book before this because there was a plot element that felt like we had been returning to it quite a lot, with the same result each time, and that plot point was sort of like put to bed. We like finished that, and I was really excited to see where we were going to go next. This book feels like a bridge, because by the end of this book, I understand where we're going next, and I'm really excited to explore that. But this actual book was a bit of a slog for me, and it kind of comes down to a couple of things. First of all, it's that Jodi Taylor, much as I love her, and much as I enjoy these books, she does it a lot where she does a big thing that is sad, and you're like, oh no. And then by the end of the book it has been somewhat, if not entirely, rolled back because it's not actually, everything is not actually as it seems, which is fine if you do it a couple of times, but by this point in the series I feel like it has happened quite a few times, and it means that any time something like that happens, I don't trust it, and therefore I do not feel emotionally impacted by it, because I'm like reading it and I'm like, I know that this is what I've been told has happened, but I actually haven't seen it happen with my own eyes, and therefore I do not trust that it is real. And lo and behold, would you believe it? It's not! And I'm a bit tired of that. I'm also really tired of the Max Peterson, what could have been kind of thing. Like, Max has, like, simultaneously, we keep shipping Leon off out of the picture for, like, presumably because we don't know what to do with him. And then we keep having these like, oh, Max and Peterson, could they have been a couple? And I'm like, either make them a couple or don't. But again, why are we still dragging that out at this point? There are also just a couple of other characters that I thought were interesting that could have been used a bit more. Like, Matthew, again, is so interesting, and I realise that she's probably not using him too much because the Time Police series has Matthew in, and that's probably where he's going to shine. But, like, the Bounty Hunters, I think they were introduced in a short story that I've not read, but I thought that they were really interesting. I would have liked a bit more of them. Like, it's just stuff like that where this one, to me, had a lot of the aspects that I feel like we have done a few times by now that I am a bit tired of. I think the next book is going to be really interesting because we are setting up a new arc, and I'm super intrigued by that arc. So I'm not like gonna give up on the series. This was potentially one of my least favourites of the series though. But I did like the historical eras that they visited. I'm a bit tired of some of the things. The book that I read on my Kindle is Island of Shattered Dreams, which is by Chantal Spitz. Oh, let me check who it's translated by. This is translated by Jean Anderson. This is the first ever novel by an indigenous Tahitian writer. It tells the story of French Polynesia, and we follow like 3 different people who are all from the same family, and we're kind of like going down through the generations and seeing what their lives are like the way that their lives have been impacted by colonialism and that kind of thing. I thought that this was a beautiful book, but beautiful in a way in which the actual language is quite sparse. It's not a hugely flowery writing, that kind of thing. One thing that was really interesting is that obviously this is in translation, so I'm reading it in translation, and I think Jean Anderson, at least from my perspective, managed to translate it in a way where there is this sparseness of language, but there was still like a lot of beauty in it. I know that the original had different languages used in different parts for very specific reasons, like it used French very specifically. Obviously that is something that cannot be translated into English, but it was very interesting to read about in sort of the translator's note. You know, it's one of those things that makes me wish I could speak all of the languages in the world and therefore read everything in their original languages and understand how they were originally intended to be written, but still. It was very interesting to follow these 3 generations because you sort of get a different understanding of like their Maori like heritage, the different ways that colonialism impacts them in different forms. It sort of all culminates with the building of this like nuclear base on one of the islands by, I think it was by Charles de Gaulle's government, which is a real thing that happened. And this book has definitely made me want to read more non-fiction books so I can get a better understanding of like Tahitian, Polynesian history, that kind of thing, because it's just not an area that I know particularly well, so I really do want to educate myself on that front. And if you have any recommendations, please do let me know. The characters sort of almost felt like they are the conduit through which we are experiencing this story and learning this history, but at the edges, because there is this sparseness to it, they're not always like super fully fleshed out. And a lot of the storylines are involving like love stories and that kind of thing, and I didn't super feel like invested in the love between the characters because they weren't like the fullest things, but I still really enjoyed reading this book. So I would really recommend this book for sure. It's just, if you're someone who really needs to feel like immersed in character in order to enjoy a story, this might not be the story for you, but I thought it was really well done, and I learnt a lot, and I would be interested. I don't know if Chantal Spitz has written any other books, but I would definitely be interested in reading them if she has. After that is a cookbook. I sometimes just talk about cookbooks on this channel. This is The Year of Miracles, recipes about love and grief and growing things by Ella Risbridger. This one specifically is like a cookbook that is designed for reading. I've talked about Midnight Chicken on here a number of times because I love it. It touches deep into my soul. It really helped me throughout the pandemic. This is Ella Risbridger's newest book, and it is also wonderful. Essentially, Midnight Chicken she wrote while her partner was undergoing cancer treatment and passed away, and this sort of is about piecing yourself back together after that. It's also the only book I've read that touches on the pandemic, because frankly it is the only book I think I can read that touches on the pandemic. I don't really want to read books about that at all at the moment. I'm not there yet. But this one is sort of okay, because it's like that idea of she's been through her shit time, she's supposed to be building herself back up, but now there's a fucking pandemic. What do you do? I just think she writes about emotions really beautifully. I love the way that she I love the role that food has in her life. I love the way she talks about food. I'm gonna have to, since I read this, I have discovered I have allergies, which will be old news by the time this video goes up, but it's still quite new news to me now. I'm gonna have to figure out how many of these recipes I can make, but I'm excited to explore them. Finally, I will mention another book that I read on my Kindle that I did not like, and that was The Taming of the Shrew by William Shakespeare. I read this because I did a podcast episode on 10 Things I Hate About You. I'll link that down below if you want to listen to it. But I was like, I should read The Taming of the Shrew, and then I'll understand what they're doing. And the most interesting thing I felt about The Taming of the Shrew was actually like the plot setup that I wasn't aware of, where it's like these rich people are tricking this homeless guy into believing that he's actually a prince. So he like falls asleep drunk, and they like wake him up in this big bed with these servants, and they're like, "Oh, my prince, we've been looking everywhere for you. Where have you been?" And they're trying to trick him into thinking that he's noble-born. And so then the actual story that is the Taming of the Shrew is like a play that is being put on for this guy. Number one, that plot setup is like, you're such dickheads. But also, number two, it's kind of an interesting construct, like a play within a play. Always an interesting thing. Unfortunately, I just didn't like it. I know that Shakespeare is sometimes misogynistic. I also know that some people read this play as being much more feminist than it might immediately seem. I just really didn't like what essentially felt like interesting woman who is called a shrew because she is outspoken and has opinions, is just like beaten down by her new husband until she has no spirit at all and just blindly accepts everything he says as truth. I just found it really depressing. So, not my favourite Shakespeare. Also just didn't really have a lot of moments that I thought were like beautiful moments of expression. You know, sometimes even when you're reading Shakespeare, even if you're like, this guy's a dickhead, you're like, but he talks nice. There weren't any moments where I was like, that's a beautiful soliloquy or anything. So, yeah, I don't like this one. I didn't really think I was gonna like it, but I thought I might like it a bit more than I did. But I didn't. That's everything I wanted to talk about this week. As per usual, have you read any of these? Would you like to share your thoughts on them? I would love to hear them if you have. Otherwise, I hope you're having a lovely day. I will see you next time for something different.